everybody, welcome back. If you are almost done with NaNoWriMo, congratulations, you're almost there. You're literally almost at the finish line. I hope it feels amazing. If you did not finish NaNoWriMo or win NaNoWriMo, I still want to say congratulations. You tried. You attempted something that most people would call crazy. Remus wants to say good job. Tell him, Remus. So since NaNoWriMo is almost over, I just wanted to spend some time talking about creativity and refilling your well of creativity. Because at this point, whether you finished NaNoWriMo or not, you're probably feeling like you're at the bottom of your creativity well, like you need to refuel. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily hitting a creativity block or a wall with your creative projects. It just means that you need to refuel. You need to find that creativity again. Go to the source of that creativity. So I want to give you some tips to help equip you now that NaNoWriMo is almost over and you're going to start tackling new creative projects, or maybe you're going to go back and look at your novel for the first time and do some editing. And that's a creative task as well because it requires a lot of energy. And it requires looking at your world that you're building in maybe a different way, reevaluating your characters or your scene or your plot. It's gonna take a lot of creative juice. So we're just gonna jump right in and talk about 5 tips to refill your well of creativity. My first tip is to go on artist dates. Now, this isn't something that I made up or invented or whatever. This is something from, I think it's Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way. And I actually tried to find it before I started filming so that we could talk about it, but I can't find it. I think I loaned it to somebody. And I'm kind of stressing about it because I was hoping to use that as our pick for December for Writerly Reads, the book club that I started. But I can't find it, so we will see. So the idea behind the artist date is that you take yourself, just you alone, solo, on kind of a little adventure, a little bit of a date. You sort of woo yourself or woo your creativity. So think about things that you wouldn't normally do. Maybe you go to a museum on a Saturday afternoon by yourself. Maybe you go out to dinner by yourself and sit down with a glass of wine and read a good book. Maybe you take an art class or go to an art show. Maybe you go to a play or some other kind of performance. Maybe you go on a hike somewhere that you've never been, or you explore a new city that you've never explored or a small town that you've never explored. The idea is that you go by yourself and you refill those experiences. It's like you're building up your reservoir of creative energy. Most authors struggle with this idea of writing what you know, especially if your life tends to kind of, like mine, sort of fall into a rhythm or just going through the motions, kind of doing the same thing every day. If you're a creature of habit, you might really resonate with that idea. Artist dates take you out of that, just a momentary, really intentional time that you set apart to replenish your creativity. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to go with your notepad and write down all the things you're learning about this performance or go to the museum and write down everything you know about that exhibit. It's not really teaching you in that way. It's more like just letting yourself experience something new that is some kind of creative outlet for you. And just giving yourself space to experience it as it is and as it comes. I think that there's something really freeing too about putting yourself out there and doing something by yourself, because we live in a culture where that's not really the norm. We don't really eat by ourselves. We don't really adventure by ourselves, but there's something to be said for going out and doing that by yourself. Julia Cameron talks about this in The Artist's Way, as I mentioned, and I'm sure she's way more eloquent than I am about what an artist date is and why it's important. So definitely check that out if this interests you at all. My second tip also comes from The Artist's Way, and that is to start morning pages. I think Julia Cameron was the one who came up with morning pages. I could be wrong about that, but basically, this is the idea that you start every single morning or evening. Usually, it's called morning pages. I think the preferred way to do it is in the morning. But basically, you set aside time every single day to write, I think it's 3 pages long form, like by hand. And it's just, you're just writing. It doesn't matter what you're writing necessarily. The idea is that you're writing for yourself. It's not something that you show anyone. And so it's this way of protecting your creativity. I think that for those of us who live on the internet, especially writers, there is this fear that creeps in, or a performance fear, where everything we're writing is being judged or criticized in some way. If you have ever started a blog, you probably know what that feeling is like. You're putting your work out there and people are reading it, and that can be really scary. Morning pages is a way of getting everything out of your head. You don't have to worry about being grammatically correct or having a great hook or, having this poetic language and being concise and having the right pacing. It's literally just like regurgitating your thoughts or maybe your dreams. Maybe you're just sitting there writing what you see out the window in that moment. It's kind of a mindfulness practice. It's a way of refilling your well of creativity. And sometimes people, after months or even years of committing every single day to morning pages, a lot of people say that it actually does show up in their work. Sometimes they write something that inspires their work in some way, or maybe is directly in their work. In Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way, she's kind of teaching, it's sort of a class format in a lot of ways. She's teaching people how to tap into or unlock their creativity. And she says that a lot of people that she's worked with in the past would describe themselves as not creative people, as uncreative people, I guess. People who don't really incorporate a lot of creativity in what they do on a day-to-day basis. She's met with lawyers and accountants and people who traditionally the world would say are not very creative people or not very creative jobs. After introducing the morning pages to these individuals, she's actually found that a lot of them, I think most, if not all of them, have admitted to feeling more creative and acting on those creative impulses after just simply committing to this very simple practice of writing 3 pages every morning. It really does unlock your creativity. If you're feeling like you're not a very creative person or you haven't been a very creative person lately, there's something about this practice, and I don't even really know what it is. I definitely will be the first one to say that there are things in The Artist's Way that I don't love or I don't agree with. You kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. Personally, that's what I believe. But there's something to be said about this practice of morning pages. It's just, it unlocks your creativity, but it also protects your creativity in a way that publishing online or in print form doesn't do. So if you're a writer, it really is something really valuable. If you're not a writer, but you still consider yourself a creative person, or you would still like to be a creative person, I still highly, highly recommend it. My third tip for refilling your well of creativity is not to put all of your creative projects in one basket. So if you consider yourself to be a painter or a dancer or a writer, whatever your kind of niche is, I suggest creating in different forms. So if you're a writer or an aspiring author, maybe you consider taking up sewing or knitting or crocheting, kind of working with your hands and creating in that way. Or maybe if you're a painter, you consider writing in morning pages every morning. There's something about tapping into different kinds of creative projects. It's very freeing because you're learning something new that maybe you're not very good at, and that's okay. Or maybe you're kind of in a rut with your writing, so you take up watercolor painting. I think the idea is not to pick something that you think that you would be really awesome at. The idea is to pick something that's different, something that you would enjoy the actual process of. And in a lot of ways, it can inspire your other forms of creativity. Maybe you take up watercolor painting and you find yourself painting your characters in your book or the landscape that you've been envisioning for some scene in your book. All of a sudden, you've tapped into a different kind of creativity, and there's no pressure like there may be with writing the novel. Maybe you hit a wall with your novel and you just don't know how to push past it. Find other ways, other creative forms to tap into that, to refill your well. Since writing is such an isolating, in your head kind of process, there's something about working with your hands and creating in a different kind of way that can just, I don't know, it just refuels you. When I'm creating in my job with editing, I find that one really helpful way to step back and refill my well of creativity is to write poetry. And this is something that I don't show anyone. It's not necessarily an aspiration that I have to write a book of poetry. It's just something that I enjoy for me, and it's something different than what I'm doing in my day-to-day job. So it's also about engaging different parts of your brain, I think, or engaging different kinds of creativity. My fourth tip is to surround yourself with other creative people. This is kind of a given, you're probably thinking, but you would be surprised how many people I talk to who don't have a creative community. They don't have a writing community if they're writers. They don't have a poetry community if they're specifically poets, or painting community if they're really into painting. It's just helpful to tap into, first of all, the community that you really want to be a part of, whether that's writing, dancing, painting. I don't know why I keep going back and forth between writing and art, but I'm sure there are many other forms of creativity here. There's something really valuable, obviously, about tapping into those specific people who have the same aspirations, but there's also something really valuable about tapping into a community of people who are doing things differently than you. If you're a writer, maybe you start meeting with somebody who has an Etsy shop, who makes, I don't know, handcrafted goods. Learning about their process, even if it doesn't apply to you specifically and your process, can still inspire you and still refill your well of creativity. Sometimes I find that it's not helpful for writers to continue talking to each other about their similar struggles, or I don't know, there's this measuring that can happen, this comparison thing that can happen. So in a lot of ways, it's really helpful to talk to somebody in a totally different industry or field. It's refreshing to talk to somebody who does something differently, but is still tapping into their creativity in a very specific way. My fifth and final tip is to keep learning. Stay curious. This is probably the most valuable tip that I could share for creative people, because if you have your blinders on, no matter what kind of way that you're expressing your creativity, it's really easy to hit dead ends, to hit a wall. If you go on a nature walk and you start learning about the plant life, you have no idea how that could affect your writing or your painting. Again with the painting. I think I need to take up painting, guys. I think this is like a sign. But anyway, I feel like there's no way of knowing how all of these different layers of how we learn, how we stay curious, there's no way of knowing how that all affects our creative work. I think that we are created to be creators. We are people who love to create, and we love the process of creating. And it can become stale. It can easily become something that you feel like you've mastered, or you've searched around every corner and you kind of know how to do what you're doing. And yeah, if you're not expanding the way that you're looking at the world, because as writers specifically, you are observers at the heart of it. You write what you know, and so you have to write what you learn. You have to kind of step out of your comfort zone and love learning. There's just no other way around it. The best creators out there love to learn. This is a challenge for me specifically, but I've found that the more I lean in to learning, the more I enjoy the creative process itself. So for example, starting this booktube channel, I was really nervous that the technology would keep me from creating these videos, from actually filming and editing. I felt like it would be an obstacle, but I've tried to lean into that and learn about editing and learn about all of this equipment so that I can make the kind of videos that I want to make. So I have goals next year specifically to keep learning about editing software, about filming equipment, how I can make the videos that I want to make, because I enjoy creating these videos and I want to keep learning. Not only so that I can make better videos, sure, that's a plus to it, but also I feel like the more that you create, the more your taste for something grows and changes. And so you have to kind of constantly adapt if you want to stay interested in that creative project. So those are my tips for refilling your well of creativity. I would love to know in a comment down below how you refuel creatively, what you do to stay interested in your creative projects, how you avoid writing blocks or creative blocks in general. Thanks so much for watching. Again, I just want to say congratulations to you guys for attempting or even winning NaNoWriMo. It's seriously something to celebrate. I wish that I had champagne, but I've got my coffee here, so cheers to you. I will talk to you tomorrow for my last NaNoWriMo themed video. Bye!